Hey there, you're tuning in to LowKey by LowKey, our easygoing sessions for hotel professionals where we chat about industry trends, issues, and solutions.
Well, hello, and thank you so much for being here for LowKey by LowKey episode 20.
Whoop, whoop.
My name is Clément Denarier. I'll be the host for this recording, for this podcast, and I have the pleasure today to talk about a very interesting topic, and that is making your budget ready for next year. Very topical, and I'm so proud, so humbled to be welcoming the awesome guest that I have today, Gaby from Radisson Hotel Group.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. Long time coming. It's been 20 episodes and finally you made it.
Whoop, whoop. No, I'm super excited to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Maybe you want to introduce yourself in a couple of words before we start.
Yeah, sure. So my name is Gaby. I work for Radisson Hotel Group already for 14 years, and I'm only 24, so you can imagine what age I was when it started. I'm Dutch, and I look after 4 countries in Radisson Hotel Group from a revenue management perspective. So Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and Czech Republic, and on top the Price Hotel brand. Pretty cool.
Amazing. And for the little story, Gaby was basically the very first LowKey fan inside of Radisson Hotel Group. Thanks to you, we managed to show the value to the entire company. And very proud to be working with the rest of your colleagues as well now. So you shared the secret sauce.
I did. Yeah. Well, you have a fantastic product, so well deserved.
Awesome. That's it. Talking about LowKey, we're not here to speak about this. Actually, we talk about budget. And I think that this is a very topical topic at the moment. It's very important to make sure that you're ready for next year. The structure of this podcast, like all the other LowKey by LowKey, we first start about this very important and interesting topic, which is making your budget ready for next year. Then we'll move on to your shameless plug. You'll have the opportunity to actually tell us all about it. We also received a question from a previous guest, so we can go through that, and finally we'll round it off.
Sounds good. Sounds perfect to me.
Awesome. Let's get going. And maybe a first introduction to talk about the budget is define what do we mean with budget. Obviously, it's kind of thinking, forecasting, preparing the year after. But when we talked earlier, we also identified that it can be interpreted in different ways.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit more about it, and also about what is your specialty, and specifically how much is expected of you creating the budget for next year?
Yeah, exactly. So when we speak of budget, usually it's something you do once a year. It takes a long time, right? But it's something you do once a year, and at a certain point it's locked. And there's 2 sides. You have revenues and you have costs.
Mm-hmm.
As I am, regional director of revenue optimization, my core responsibility is the revenue side, together with my team. Obviously, they create the budgets for all their hotels, and I support them. So that is our core responsibility. And with revenues, I then really mean total revenues. So that's not just rooms. That's also food and beverage, meeting and events, and other revenues such as parking, laundry, all of that. We need to budget. And then you also have the cost element of it, which is something that we're involved in more, from an advisory perspective, but that is more the responsibility of the general managers of the specific properties, because obviously they have local knowledge on collective labor agreements that we do not necessarily have, or, they will know that the oranges for next year will be more expensive, something like that. So, and then, all of that combined at the end of the day will need to result in a positive bottom line, so to say.
I guess this is kind of the simple math that needs to happen, right? A lot of plus, little minus, but the end equation needs to be as positive as possible.
Exactly. And there will be targets set for that as well, right? There'll be expectations from the company or from the owners on specific bottom line numbers that we need to achieve. So you need to work together to get there at the end of the day.
And so it's August now, and you're saying that basically the budget process has already started. This is extremely early, obviously. How come? Why do you have to start so early?
We start in June.
Wow.
Actually, already. I talk from the experience from the Radisson Hotel Group, which is the company I work for. It could be different than other companies. I'm not sure. We start in June, but in the end, it is finalized or locked, so to say, usually in like November or something. So it's quite a long process. We need to know where we stand at a certain point and be able to plan everything for the next year. And there's a lot of things that you already know quite early in the year. If you look at specific destinations, the event calendar, so to say, for many big cities is known already. There will be an estimation on the projected inflation already. If Easter is going to move a month or something. So, and those kind of things are a base for the budget. So usually the first trigger point is what's going to happen with the events, and are there bank holidays or something moving, which is something already. So that is what you start with, kind of in June, and then every month, you can add more things. You will have more actual data of this year, and more things will be added. But the starting point is always already for us in June. Already, yeah.
So if I understand correctly, the budget is really kind of a look into what next year is and a clear forecast, at least from a revenue side of things, right? And that probably also brings it to the cost. You mentioned the events, you mentioned the bank holidays, or at least the calendar. What other considerations do you have for kind of the base of your budget?
Well, those things that I mentioned, you will have some properties that will undergo renovation or refurbishment, something to take into consideration, or extra supply that's being added to a certain market. If you have, let's take Hamburg, for example, where we now know that there's a huge project of a competitors of ours opening soon. You need to think about that, right?
Yeah.
Not every hotel that has 60 rooms will have an impact, but if it's a hotel with 500 rooms, it will probably have an impact. So that's things that you need to think about. For bigger M&E hotels, you're on the books, of course. If you have some big events for that year already confirmed in certain months, you need to take that in consideration. And that all of it is kind of, put into a bowl, stirred. You have the company's expectations and targets, and then you get a budget at the end of the day. But it's a lot of different things that you need to consider, really.
I was about to ask you. So obviously there is whatever is kind of happening, and it's sometimes under your control and outside of your control, but there's also probably some expectations that are coming also that are from different stakeholders in the company.
Very, usually, the expectations do not get less by the year, right? Inflation is there, that needs to be recovered. And we, at the end of the day, we need to make more money, not less. Ideally. And that's quite clear. And usually those targets, if you look at it from a bigger portfolio point of view, it's a consolidated target. So that means, if you have one hotel that will perform less because of, whatever the reasons could be that we just discussed, another hotel needs to compensate and do more, right? So, and that's then also a bit where my role comes into play. I'm responsible for 40 hotels. If there's one hotel that is going to drop, then I'll need to, move it elsewhere, probably. And, but make it as realistic as possible, because we want, at the end of the day, all the budgets to be as realistic as possible.
And so I imagine this sounds like a very daunting task to do all of that, right? You mentioned it's a big pot. There's a lot of different ingredients you need to put into it.
Yeah.
And at the end, the cake needs to be tasty and tastier every year, right?
Yeah.
How much do you think that experience, and your experience specifically within your revenue management, because you mentioned you're 24, right? So you've been doing this for only a couple of years. How did your experience help you in getting better at creating a budget year after year?
Well, I think in general, with experience, besides the fact that we have a lot of actual data, to base our assumptions on, you also develop a better gut feeling for, what will happen in certain hotels. And you can easily compare certain hotels, even though they are in a very different city. If I have a big M&E machine in Amsterdam and you also have one in Hamburg, there are similarities, even though rate levels might be very different, but trends tend to be similar. So that helps you. That is one thing that helps you a lot. And what I always find very important is, at a certain point, you come to the budget presentations, right? You have your numbers. And then the finance guys, they look at the ratios. They will say, okay, guys, but last year you made 100 euros of parking revenue for every room sold, and now you decreased it to like 50.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in my first year, I was like, I don't even know what he's talking. Is that true? So ratios,
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that makes sense from a segmentation perspective, from a amount of breakfast covers perspective. All of that needs to make sense. Why would your breakfast revenue, if your occupancy goes up the next year, why would your breakfast revenue decrease? Probably not. So it all needs to be aligned, and that is, well, as you said, it's tricky because there's so many different things to look at, and if you change one thing, you need to change the rest as well.
And probably that one thing also has an influence then on the other items that are there, right? If you actually all of a sudden have a strategy that maybe Pharisee goes for one channel more than another, the behavior of that guest might be very different. If, I don't know, they come via your direct channels or via OTAs, than if it is an M&E contracted rate where all of it is already included.
Yeah. So no, there's a lot of things to take into consideration. And then, when you come to, at the end, the bottom line needs to be, as good as possible.
Mm-hmm.
GMs worked on costs. If I then, come back after a month and I say, well, guys, the average rate that we, generally budgeted for next year is going to drop by 3 or 4 euros. That has a huge impact because there's not necessarily a lot of costs associated with that we can then take out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Less occupancy, okay, then we will have less housekeeping costs, maybe one receptionist less, but if it's purely rate, you can save a bit on commissions maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But that's it, really. So that makes, if that happens, then general managers tend to be quite unhappy and will try to say, okay, but can we try to get it back?
Yeah, exactly. And you mentioned that you are responsible for 40 hotels.
Yeah.
That's then 40 general managers that will be, probably not all 40 will be, coming and knocking the door, but you definitely have some challenges there.
Yeah.
So we mentioned that it takes quite some time between the moment that you start and the moment that you lock it, that you agree to it. What would be the signs that you're on a good track, that you're almost done and you have consensus and you're about to lock it?
Yeah. Well, so we start in June, and now actually this month we'll do, another round. We'll get some revised targets, so to say. And then in September, that's always the month when we will have the presentation. So that is the month where the hotels also need to make sure that their costs are fully aligned to the revenues.
Mm-hmm.
And then the general managers, together with their revenue managers and financial controllers, will need to present their budget to the regional directors. Myself, I will be then also included there, and regional finance. And then we have a look at all these hotels together and see where we need to tweak, where we need to get a bit more. And after those meetings, you kind of know, okay, these hotels look very good, there's not much more to get there. Here we see some more opportunity. Here we might see some risk. So that's usually, September is the month where we will have a first good feeling with where we are, with the total picture. Yeah.
And so moving into kind of locking or going towards locking a certain budget for the year after, I imagine that this means that you also need to create a strategy on how you can actually achieve that budget. It's not just a number that you please people with and that's it. You actually have to make it happen, right?
Yeah.
How does that translate on a yearly basis from really a budget into an actual a strategy? What are the different levers that you find in order to actually make that budget?
Yeah. Well, and that's good that you mentioned that, because that touches base on a very important topic, and that's the collaboration part on making this budget. At the end, it's a joint effort. People tend to think that it's just the revenue manager pulling in some numbers into some systems and it rolls out and we're happily there. But we need to involve, sales needs to be involved, meeting and events needs to be involved, because we can say, well, in our corporate transient segment, we're going to push the rate up by 4 euros to make this budget. But if sales already knows that 3 of the biggest corporate accounts, have a rate cap that will not increase, it won't happen. So you need to be in very close contact with all commercial departments to make sure that it's realistic, one. And in case there's a big strategy change, because I don't know, this year the strategy was wrong, or you want to change something, there need to be meetings again with all the commercial departments to say, okay, how are we going to do that? And those meetings actually happen then in parallel when making the budgets. Yeah. But it's very important because, it's as you said, it's at the end of the day, it's a piece of paper. But if the strategy is not behind it, then at the 10th of January, you could throw it in the bin because then it's not going to happen, right? So that's very important.
So to come back to the analogy of multiple ingredients to make that cake, there is not just multiple ingredients, there's also multiple chefs and actually a lot of cooks in the kitchen to make sure that cake is beautifully baked.
No, and that's also how I, urge my team to really, discuss the budgets of the individual hotels with their counterparts in sales, in meeting and events, in marketing, with finance, to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because we are at the end all working towards the same goal, right? Which is the highest profitable revenue for the hotel. Yeah.
I love that you mentioned profit in here. So that brings us back to the cost, obviously. What I'm curious about is how much of a sale, what's the process in using technology in both kind of the revenue side, but also on the cost side, because you have to budget for technology and in this case any technology that you use that will help you achieve that budget. What's the process there? How do you agree and kind of make a decision on what to include on the budget next year from a cost perspective that will help you achieve that revenue side?
Yeah. Well, obviously, we work with a lot of different kind of technology and systems. And generally speaking, there are a few different things, right? A system like LowKey, for example, it has to do at the end of the day with the ROI that it can produce, user-friendliness, innovation behind the system, and in case there are multiple players on the market offering the same product, the price comes into play. That's one thing. You have also systems more like a forecasting tool, which will not necessarily like bring an ROI like a system like LowKey does, but that's more of a it'll save time for the revenue managers if that works correctly, that they can use to do other things. And at the end of the day, it's you compare, and you choose the best one. But the fact that there is a budget for technology, that's a no-brainer. We need it, and we need quite a lot of different systems to work with to make our lives easier.
And would you say that it's then easier to kind of budget a tool or a piece of technology that provides clear ROI versus another piece of technology that might have less direct return on investment?
No, not necessarily. The ROI there would then more be calculated in terms of saving time, which is more difficult because it's also very individual. It could save, 2 hours per day, whatever for me, whereas for somebody else, it would only be 1 hour. So that is more difficult. And a lot of those systems are also integrated with each other. So it's not necessarily more difficult, because we know we need them, but it's less black and white, so to say. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I'd love to kind of go back to maybe the first budget that you've ever created.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you have any tips that you could give to yourself only 2 years back. Really like practical. What is it that you should really look at to make that process easier for someone that would be creating their budget for the first time?
Yeah, I thought about this. I think, especially for your first one, over prepare, make sure that, you know it inside out, the market of your hotels inside out. So over prepare, communicate with all stakeholders, don't go and sit in your ivory tower and look at your Excel file or whatever system. Speak to the general manager of the property, speak to your counterparts, because they have very valuable information that you need. And in the end, if you don't, and they don't agree, you have to start all over again.
Yeah.
And which is what I mentioned a bit earlier, look at the ratios. It will save you a lot of time. If your breakfast capture ratio doesn't make sense, or if your, room rental and meeting and events doesn't make sense, that is something finance, will destroy you for.
They
will destroy. They will say, okay,
don't forget your ratios.
And I learned the hard way, right? Because I think one of my first budgets, I was in a meeting and they were like, okay, guys, I don't know, but why is your room rental going down and total M&E revenue going up? And I was like, didn't really look at it. Yes, right. Ratios. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, time's up. So what that means is thank you so much, first of all, for all of these golden nuggets on budgeting. Again, a very daunting task that if you look at your ratios, you're going to do just fine.
Yes, you're going to kill it.
Yes, absolutely. Time for the shameless plug. Woo. So Gaby, you can shamelessly plug any product personally, professionally, anything that you want to share with our listeners.
Yeah. I thought about, let me just tell about the holiday I had for the past 2 weeks, but I thought maybe not that interesting for all the listeners. So I work for Radisson Hotel Group, right? And I just want to shamelessly promote our super cool openings that we've had this past year and are still up, to come. This year we already opened 2 new hotels, and that's only in my region. Let me be clear. Right? Yeah. There's much more hotels opening around. We opened a new Price Hotel in Dresden, Germany, and a Radisson in Graz, Austria. The last one actually just before, literally 2 days before the Formula One of Austria.
Wow.
Yeah. That was like the target to get that done. Yeah, so that was cool. And then we have 3 more hotels opening, let's say between now and roughly 6 months, which is a Radisson in Leipzig, Germany. A Radisson Blue in Vienna, another one, Austria. And then the last one, and that's also one that I'm personally very excited about, is the reopening of our Radisson collection in Berlin. Perhaps you or any of the listeners remember that, 2 years ago, there was this horrific event that the fish tank that we had in the lobby of that hotel exploded. Luckily, nobody was harmed there, most important thing. But yeah, it took us 2 years to get the show on the road again.
Wow.
And we're nearly there. So somewhere between November this year and February next year, we will reopen that hotel. No more fish tank.
I was about to ask you,
no.
Is the aquarium still there?
No. We're going to get a super cool, it's called a living tree. Okay. Because the space is there, right? I saw some renderings. It looks pretty awesome. So that's going to come back as the new eye catcher of the lobby. So, and we're working on, we talked about budgets and commercial strategies. That's in the works as we speak for that super cool property. So, yes, super, super excited for that one to reopen. It's one of our flagships.
Amazing.
So, very cool.
Amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So to all listeners, go and check out all these openings.
Yes.
Nice. Well, that's the last piece that I wanted to ask you is actually another question from our previous guest.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, if you were a traveler and you would travel to a destination that's unknown, what deal, what service would you like to be offered by the hotel? And you can think of anything, right? You're traveling there personally to a faraway destination.
Yeah, exactly. Because usually I tend to be the girl that would always be interested in the room upgrade, right? Which, is cool, but maybe a bit boring as well. So if I would go somewhere a bit far where I don't know the culture or the food, I think I would be very interested in like a traditional cooking class.
Okay, cool.
Of I don't know. And I know that is offered because I've done one myself a while back in Bali. It was pretty cool. So I would be very excited to do something like that again. Could be offsite or in the hotel even, if they offer it. That would be pretty awesome.
I think this rounds off the conversation perfectly. We talked about ingredients, chefs, kitchen, cuisine, beautiful cake as the budget for next year. And now we can go travel and actually cook the specialties of that specific place.
Happy days.
Awesome. Gaby, thank you so much for this. This was brilliant. If our listeners want to find you, where can they find you?
Gosh, you mean like online or in real life?
Both. Where are you available?
Well, no, I live in Utrecht in the Netherlands. I travel a lot for work, and they can look me up on Instagram. My name is, I think it will be tagged, right? Or do I like look in the camera and say it's right here? Hello, I don't know.
In the caption.
Yeah, it's like in the caption. So yeah, no, on LinkedIn and on Instagram, hit me up.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Gaby. This was awesome.
You're very welcome.
This was LowKey by LowKey. See you next time.